Today we are talking about some of the greatest straight-to-video movies of all time. Straight-to-video, sometimes a dirty word, but definitely not in this case, definitely not in the case of Charles Band's Full Moon Entertainment. So down in the comments, I'd like you to tell me your favorite straight-to-video horror movie. Hello, I'm Adam Caesar. This is Project Black T-Shirt, the channel where I usually take one or two horror movies and then pair them with a reading recommendation that you will enjoy if you like those movies. Today we're doing something a little different because we're talking about 12 movies and then other assorted ephemera, and then we're going to rank those movies, but we'll get to that in a second. I am the author of Clown in a Cornfield, the slasher novel that if you like blood and guts, if you like clowns, if you like rural pastoral corn, you will enjoy. Just recently, right when I was prepping this video, I got word that this book, this novel right here, was nominated for the Bram Stoker Award, the 2021 Bram Stoker Awards. It was nominated in the Superior Achievement in a Young Adult Novel category, and I cannot be more thrilled and more honored that the HWA, the Horror Writers Association, has nominated this book. I've also got a ton of other books. If you've read Clown in the Cornfield and you want more of my work, these are not YA, but you can probably read them if you enjoyed Clown in the Cornfield. They're available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, beautifully produced audiobooks. Wherever books are sold, I'll put the links down in the description for those. If you like this video, if you could stand this video, don't forget to hit like. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and go check out my other videos. They're significantly shorter than this one, probably. I've never done this before. I do not know how it's going to go. Usually I'm fairly verbose, like to chat a lot about movies, so my videos tend to run long, but we are going to talk about the complete Puppet Master 12 Blu-ray collection box set, which actually includes 11 films, and then we are going to talk about the most recent entry in the Puppet Master films franchise, Blade Iron Cross, which is so new it wasn't even in the box set. Talk about each briefly, give them a kind of capsule review, or what passes for a capsule review, because it'll probably be fairly long, and then I'm going to rank them. I'm going to rank the movies. And if you're clicking this video and you're like, I'm a Puppet Master fanatic, I don't really care to hear about each one of the movies individually, I know all about them, I just want to hear your rankings, I'll put a link, a timestamp link down in the description, and I'll also try to put one of those chapter stops when I start ranking. I'll just put that if you want to skip just to that part. And before anyone chimes in down in the comments and says there are actually two more Puppet Master movies you're missing and you're not talking about, I know that. I've chosen for this video to only talk about the official, the quote-unquote canon, even though, as we'll talk about, there really isn't much of a canon because there isn't much of a continuity because these movies contradict themselves left and right. I've only chose to talk about the Charles Band produced official canon full moon movies, which means I'm not talking about Puppet Master Littlest Reich, which I actually enjoy quite a bit, even though it's completely different and sits completely outside of the rest of the movies. Since the puppets are really evil and Toulon's evil. And I'm not talking about the hour-long, straight-to sci-fi movie produced by the Sci-Fi Channel, Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys, because that movie was actually not produced by Full Moon, even though it is Ted Nicolau, the director of the Subspecies movies. That one stars Corey Feldman, and the puppets look all weird, they look different. So I'm not going to talk about that one, but I'm going to talk about the main series. I think that will be enough for most people. This week's book recommendation, I usually do this at the end of the video, but I'm gonna kind of reference it throughout, or quasi-reference it throughout. But it is a book I've talked about before in some of my other Full Moon videos. The book is It Came from the Video Aisle, Inside Charles Band's Full Moon Entertainment Studio by Dave J., Torsten Dewey, and William S. Wilson. This is a fantastic book. It is like an oral history of Full Moon Entertainment. It's kind of the sequel to a book that they did about Empire Pictures, but this is just the Full Moon years, and if you're at all interested in filmmaking and low-budget filmmaking and independent filmmaking and that kind of history of 90s straight-to-video horror, it is basically the definitive book on the subject. It's unbelievably good. I really, really recommend it. There's a whole kind of appendix section where they run down each of the Puppet Master movies. And I'm probably going to get my facts wrong because I read this book a while ago, and I'm going to talk as much as I can in vagary so that I don't get my facts wrong. But if you really want a full deep dive into the history of these films, this video is not really going to be that. It's going to be my subjective impressions of these films. But if you want the history of it, I highly, 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 highly recommend this book. It's not at all a kind of glamorization of Charles Band, even though he's interviewed for the book, and a lot of Full Moon people cooperate and talk to the authors of the book. It's clearly done with love, but it's not like a hit piece. But it is a very kind of warts and all discussion of the history of this company, and it's really, really good. But with that out of the way, let's dig into this box set. A box set so massive, so jam-packed that I'm not even keeping one of the movies in here, one of the Blu-rays in here, because it's like becomes difficult to take them out because the cardboard is almost too small to contain all the awesomeness of the Puppet Master films. Start at the beginning, we're going to talk about Charles Band's Puppet Master as it is stylized on the cover here. This film is not directed by Charles Band, and Charles Band would not direct one for 30 years after this. But this is instead directed by David Schmoller. If that name sounds familiar to you, he's a very accomplished director. He's done a number of really great genre pictures, my favorite of which is Tourist Trap, which Band also produced. In a lot of ways, Tourist Trap and Dolls, the Empire Picture Dolls, Stuart Gordon's Dolls, if you put those two together, they are kind of the template for the Puppet Master movies. They were showing Band, in my opinion, it seems like they were showing Band what worked, what didn't, and you push those two movies together, and then you add some World War II pulp, and you add some comic book mentality, and you get the Puppet Master series. You get these movies. You can see right off the bat why Puppet Master launched a franchise. We have a fairly idiosyncratic beginning to a more or less straightforward horror movie. We open up in 1939. It's a pre-credit sequence where a guy is making puppets, and we can see that they're moving on their own. The movie doesn't really play that as a secret that this guy Andre Toulon has the ability to make these puppets move, but he's holed up in this hotel, in this California-based hotel, the Bodega Bay. Get used to that name because you're going to hear it a lot. He's in this hotel. It's 1939, and he is experimenting with his puppets. He's building his puppets, and one of his puppets comes to warn him, Blade comes to warn him, that there are bad guys in the hotel coming to get him. So he hides his trunk, he hides all his puppets away for decades and decades, and just as these shadowy agents are about to knock down his door and do something terrible to him in the hotel, he shoots himself rather than kind of give up this secret of why he's able to make these puppets move. Flash forward to present day, so 1989, and we have a kind of montage sequence where we're meeting all these different people, and they're all in one way or another psychics. One is like reading fortunes. Two of them are a couple, and they're studying psychic powers as it relates to sex. And then we have our main guy, who's just this kind of everyman psychic. But they all get a vision at the same time. They get some kind of message from this guy they used to know named Neil Gallagher, and they're all brought to Bodega Bay mysteriously by this kind of psychic message. They get there and they catch up on their old buddy Neil, who they all kind of seem to resent and hate. They catch up on like what's been going on with him. They meet his wife, and the wife tells them, "Oh, didn't you hear? Neil's dead. He shot himself." Gallagher has set some kind of plot in motion, and it involves these puppets that he unearthed, that he found Toulon's secret hiding place for his trunk, and these puppets are now under the control of a very evil guy, and they're sinister-looking puppets, and this whole thing is kind of an excuse to have these people running around this hotel, getting killed by these really weird puppets. There's Blade, Pinhead, who's got these big hands, big human hands in some parts, the Leech Woman, who's it's like basically a Barbie doll that spits out live leeches onto people, Tunneler, my personal favorite, and Jester, who's kind of the Charlie Brown of the puppets, if I may. This first Puppet Master movie really does introduce a lot of ideas that will be picked over for 30 odd years, even if the particulars of the continuity is never really gels, never really makes much sense if you put these movies next to each other. To me, it is such a collaboration of two Davids. This may be Charles Band's brainchild, and this series may go on to be more and more dictated by Charles Band's kind of tastes and aesthetics. But this first movie really does feel like a nice companion piece to Tourist Trap. But you add the power of David Allen. David Allen is the kind of stop motion whiz. There's a lot of stop motion in these first three movies in particular. So much stop motion that it gets recycled in later movies. So many of these shots just you'll see again and again and again. Prepare to see Blade from Puppet Master 2 jumping off that bed 100 times. David Allen first cut his teeth on the Equinox, which is in the Criterion Collection, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and got an Academy Award nominated for Young Sherlock Holmes. He is a master of this stuff. And this movie, him and David Schmoller are really the two kind of creative forces that make this movie so successful, I believe. It's an awesome start to the series, and it's a nice looking movie too. All of these Blu-rays, we'll talk about it when we get to the later films, but all these Blu-rays are worth it, and all these Blu-rays really kind of look their best because while some of the later Full Moon movies really kind of got into the shooting on tape and shooting on video and shooting on lower quality video, for the most part, the Puppet Master movies were always produced on film. These first few had the backing of Paramount because Paramount had a distribution deal with Full Moon and they were kind of co-producing these movies. Band even talked about this, but so many people kind of erroneously misremember the Puppet Master movies as theatrical movies. They thought for sure that they'd seen them in the theaters. And when you look at these Blu-rays, even though things are kind of framed with the action kind of towards the center of the screen because they knew these were going to be full screen home video VHS releases, they really sing and they really look good in widescreen and in high definition because they're nicely shot, made on 35mm movies. How are we doing for time? Oh boy. Okay. Gotta speed this up. We are going to talk next about Puppet Master 2. I've sometimes seen this credited as his unholy creation, but it doesn't carry that subtitle here. Is the one Puppet Master film that I would unreservedly call a horror movie. Puppet Master 2 is directed by Dave Allen, the effects guy on the first movie. The puppets never look better than they do in Puppet Master 2, even though tonally it's a very different movie from most of the other movies. It is a much meaner movie, and I actually think that goes in the plus column rather than the minus column. It's a little bit of a sleazier movie. It's just got a lot going on. This movie begins with the puppets from the last movie digging up Toulon's grave. I guess Toulon was buried somewhere near Bodega Bay or where they could get to him. They're digging him up. He's been buried kind of in a trunk or in his coffin looks like a trunk. They open it up and they pour some kind of liquid, some kind of potion onto Toulon's body, and they bring him back. The puppets bring back the Puppet Master in this movie. He's not the kindly guy that we'll see later, and he's not the kindly guy that is alluded to by William Hinckley's version of the character in the first movie and the brief snippet we see him in. He becomes basically a universal monster or a universal mad scientist type character. And it's not just because we see him all wrapped up in basically the Invisible Man's attire. It's because he sucks and he's really mean and he's hell-bent on resuscitating his dead wife is his motivation in this movie, which is immediately negated by the next movie, but don't worry about that. So Toulon's back, the Bodega Bay's closed up, a group of paranormal investigators, kind of the ghost hunters, before there was ghost hunters, this is 1990, this is only a year after the first film, comes to the Bodega Bay. They set up video cameras, they're investigating claims that drove the characters from the first movie crazy. None of the cast returns, but we do talk about the Alex Whittaker character, one of the surviving psychics from the first movie, and off screen they basically are like, oh, he went to the nut house. So they're investigating that claim, and it's just these 4 or 5 good-looking young people that are offered up basically to the puppets, Toulon's puppets. Toulon is under the impression that one of these, the main heroine of that group, is his reincarnated wife, Elsa. We get a little bit of backstory. There's a really cool flashback sequence, one of the cooler stop-motion animated sequences in the movie, where Toulon, we find out, I think it's 1912 or something like that, how Toulon learned the secret of bringing his puppets to life. It was in Egypt. He meets with this guy who shows him the secret of this, and that never really comes up again because it doesn't really square with some of the later how he does it plots in the other movies. But Toulon is convinced that this girl is his reincarnated wife. He wants to put he's got this raggedy ass body under his bandages. He wants to put his body into a new body. And in order to do that, he needs the puppets to gather kind of materials. It's unclear because they at one point are like mutilating animals, and he doesn't want that to happen. But while all this is happening, to up the body count, we have like these characters that don't live in Bodega Bay, that are almost the like crazy don't go over to the Bodega Bay because it has a death curse characters, and we see them get dispatched. Toulon during this time builds a new puppet, Torch, one of the fan favorites, one of the coolest puppets, the coolest looking puppets in the series. There's this weird cutaway scene where Torch just destroys a kid. It's really, really dark and really, really mean. And I'm going to choose my words carefully here because I don't think any of these movies are boring. Well, some of them are, but I don't think for the most part any of these movies are boring, or none of them lag, because they're all really short movies. The runtime on each one of them is bolstered by pretty long opening credit sequences and long ending credit sequences. But this is the briskest. It feels like the quickest of the bunch, and it just moves. Like funny moments, weird moments, a lot of gross horror gags, especially towards the end of it, which this movie becomes almost like there's like Peter Jackson levels of arterial spray and goo that's shooting out of gross zombie Toulon's body. And then it ends on a cliffhanger that sets up an awesome idea for a further Puppet Master adventure, where these are bad guys. And you'll notice the puppets are doing a lot of killing, and doing a lot of killing of innocents in these first two movies. And they kind of get around that. Later in the series, they make the puppets much more kinder and gentler, much more kind of the good guys and the action heroes of the series. And it's not exactly off-brand, because we do imply that the puppets are under the control of bad guys, and they do have a certain amount of autonomy when they feel like they're being misused or being used in the wrong way. They will fight back. But Puppet Master 2, just a joy. Puppet Master 3, Toulon's Revenge. I'm not going to do much comparing my list to other people's, because I haven't really looked up any lists or any rankings of these movies. But I do know, just from generally talking to a lot of people and talking to my friends about these movies, Puppet Master 3 is widely considered the best movie in the series. It is the first outing for someone who would go on to direct like 5 of these movies. David Dakota, the insanely prolific journeyman, low-budget horror director. But this is the biggest budgeted of the movies. They shoot on the Universal backlot. It is a prequel. It is a period prequel, which will become a real recurring theme and real recurring trope later in these movies. But this is the origin story of Andre Toulon, taking little bits and pieces from the first 2 movies, or not particularly seeing the need to adhere to them completely. It retells the story of Toulon as a much more sympathetic, much more tragic figure who is doing puppet shows in Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II. He is putting on these puppet shows that are kind of anti-Nazi, and those get him in trouble with the Gestapo. And not only do they get him in trouble, but they put him under the microscope, and the Axis powers realize that he has the ability to make his puppets move on their own. They see him and his wife filling up the puppets with the serum, with the elixir that helps them move. And wouldn't you know it, the Nazis want that power for themselves, because they've been trying to reanimate dead soldiers, and they would like to steal Toulon's elixir, steal a secret to Toulon's elixir, get him to make it so that they can reanimate their soldiers and have an infinite zombie army. The main bad guy, the main Nazi in this, is Richard Lynch, who you'll recognize if you've seen any amount of 70s and 80s horror pictures. He's a fantastic character actor. Toulon in this one is played by yet a third actor, Guy Rolfe, but Guy Rolfe will stick around for a little while, and he kind of becomes the Toulon in your mind as you watch these movies, as they keep going on, because he's this kinder, gentler, softer Toulon, very paternalistic, very grandfather-esque. He's got this wizened little pointed beard. Seems like a very nice guy. A nice guy until you mess with his wife, and then he's gonna send his puppets after you. First 3 movies kind of, they do this thing where they add a puppet every time, and this time we add Six Shooter, who is the most elaborate puppet yet. And the second half of the movie is just Toulon kind of fighting the Nazis, making friends, trying to get people out of Nazi-occupied areas. He's just a real good guy, and Richard Lynch really gets his in one of the most spectacular kill sequences in the movie. So when you think low-budget pictures, you usually don't think period films, you usually don't think war movies, but this is like I said, this is the highest budgeted of the Puppet Master movies, and it really shows. They shot on the Universal backlot. It's got a ton of cool exteriors. It's got a ton of interesting sets and locations. It's got a lot of special effects. It's got a ton of gore, and it's really, really good. And it really kind of sets the tone for where these movies will go. Even though, somewhat of a spoiler alert, these movies never really reach the heights again of this movie. The next one we're going to talk about, I'm holding up two movies because, geez, we don't want to keep you here forever. We are going to talk about Puppet Master 4 and Puppet Master 5. And the reason I want to talk about them together is they were shot at the same time. They are the Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions of the Puppet Master films. And the reason that they were shot that way, at least partially, or to my understanding, is that this script, this story idea, was originally supposed to be, Paramount was so happy with how many units the Puppet Master movies were selling. They were so happy with Charles Band's their production deal with Charles Band and Full Moon, that they had kind of greenlit or at least were developing a Puppet Master the motion picture, like Puppet Master the movie. And this story was originally written to be one movie. They were shot at the same time, but it was originally meant to be that Puppet Master the motion picture. But what we have here instead is two movies that are pretty short with the same cast that tell one big long story, even though they get kind of repetitive in there. And you'll notice just a tonal difference, and you'll notice an aesthetic difference where these feel very polished, and they do feel like, quote unquote real movies, bigger budgeted movies. And some of the effects, especially this guy right here, Sutek, are really impressive and really weird and really out there. But they do feel there's a lot less gore. There's no nudity. They don't feel quite as sleazy, quite as forbidden, verboten as the movies before them do. And that trend maybe started in 3, but really, really it becomes more pronounced in these movies. So we ignore the kind of cliffhanger ending of 2. We're now back at the Bodega Bay Hotel. We are following this young kid, Rick, who's this super smart whiz kid engineer who's working on something like robotics and artificial intelligence. And even though he's just a kid, kind of a kid, and he plays laser tag with his robots and stuff like that, he's being commissioned by a laboratory. He's working with a laboratory to try to crack this code of autonomous movement, of basically making the puppets walk like Andre Toulon was able to do. He finds the puppets, he's in possession of the puppets, and the puppets, because he is a good puppet master, the puppets are his friends, they are his buddies. While at the same time, Sutek, this evil guy here, he is, we've talked about Egypt, we've talked about kind of the connection to kind of Egyptian, almost Lovecraftian old ones. Sutek is one of those guys, and he hates that Toulon stole the secret of the puppets and stole the secret of animation, of life from him. So he's sending these bad guys. Everyone calls them totems. Everyone online calls them totems. He's sending these kind of cool looking Dave Allen creations, these cool looking creatures to get the puppets and to get rid of Rick. And in order to defeat them in this one, Rick has to build the secret ultimate brand new puppet, the Decapitron, which kind of looks like a somewhat unformed blade until you pop a new head on it. And he basically has like an electricity gun, but he just doesn't have that. He doesn't have that zip. He doesn't have that. He's not as cool as Torch. He's not as cool as Six Shooter. And then we move to Puppet Master 5. Which is, I don't want to say more of the same, but somewhat more of the same. We learn more about like who Rick has been working for, this lab, all these different kind of cutaways that we had to murders that happen in Puppet Master 4, where the totems are trying to take out anyone who's figuring out this secret of life. And in Puppet Master 5, it really is all justified by the final 10 minutes, which is just an all-out puppet brawl, where we have in both of these films, there's an abundance of new Dave Allen stop motion animation that does look quite good, and does get used again and again in other movies. But I really do wonder, they're the first Puppet Master movies that really make you think, I wonder what could have been. I wonder what this script was before director Jeff Burr was brought on pretty quickly. Charles Band had to tell him, quick, we need you to make 2 movies back to back. Here's the budget. Make these movies. I really wonder what that theatrical Puppet Master movie would have looked like. So basically, these first 5 movies were released one a year, made even quicker than that because the last 2 were shot at the same time. 89, 90, 91. Then we skipped 92, 93, 94. I believe Puppet Master 5, and Charles Band talks about these in the video zones that are included on these DVDs, which were with the original VHS releases of these. They're like a video magazine where he'd update you on Full Moon Productions and what was coming up next. But in the video zones for either 4 or 5, I can't remember which, he talks about Puppet Wars, which is going to be this spin-off series where the puppets are going to be in this brand new trilogy of films. The Puppet Master movies themselves are going to end. Puppet Master 5 was the final chapter, and then there's going to be Puppet Wars, and it's going to be this grand trilogy of films. That doesn't happen, and those movies and those titles are reconfigured years later into different forms. But there were scripts for those. There were 3, I think all 3 specs were written. They talk more about it in the It Came From the Video Aisle book that I recommended at the beginning of this video. It's very interesting, and another one of those inflection points of like what could have been. But Full Moon's relationship with Paramount had soured, and those movies never happened. So there is a 4-year gap between Puppet Master 5 and the next movie, which is a long enough gap you could have put all 5 of the original Puppet Masters in that 4 years. But the next movie to be made brings David DeCoteau back to the fold, and it's called Curse of the Puppet Master. And this is where things... It was a weird series already. I mean, you had a Barbie doll that barfs up leeches, and they're all fighting Nazis and stuff like that. It was not an easy to synopsize series, but boy, this is where things get weird. Curse of the Puppet Master is a much lower budgeted affair. The Blu-ray for this, there's a disclaimer in the beginning that some of the elements were lost and some of them are just tape elements, and I don't even know if that's true or not, or if parts of this movie were shot on video. But this is a weird outlier, and it kind of gets you ready for how crazy and how weird and how threadbare some of the later movies are going to get. With no real explanation as to why, we are no longer in the Bodega Bay Hotel. We are back in the present that's kind of stylized like the past for some of the way these characters talk and dress and act, but it is ostensibly the present, and the puppets have a new puppet master who keeps them in cages, who is trying to figure out how to build this perfect puppet up. He's trying to figure out how to build some kind of puppet. When we first see him, he's burning something in a bag. He's burning what we think is a puppet. He's trying to cover something up. He's shady, but he has a daughter who's really nice. They meet this guy who's getting bullied by the local hoodlums in this town. The implication that he's either somewhat slow or just an outsider or just a geek. And the puppet master, this new doctor, offers to take this kid in and give him work because this kid has preternatural carving skills. He puts him to work carving this ultimate puppet that he really wants. And the kid gets a crush on the girl, on the daughter. He's living in this house, and while all this is happening, the puppets are just kind of around. The puppets from the Puppet Master films are really sidelined in this movie because it is somewhat of a spoiler to say, if you were familiar with the film with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 S's. Don't say it, hiss it. I'm pretty sure I even talked about this on this is the Scream Factory Blu-ray. I'm pretty sure I talked about this movie on a long ago video. But this is a remake of this for no real apparent reason, and it's like a directly acknowledged and referenced thing because one of the snake puppets from shows up in the guy's kind of museum/laboratory in Curse of the Puppet Master. So yeah, this is a pretty much a standalone movie because nothing really that happens in it connects to the other movies, but it's not without its merits. David Dakota is a very idiosyncratic director at times. He's clearly very workmanlike, but when he's allowed to kind of indulge in the things that he's interested in and that he fixates on, you get a movie where there's a lot of guys in tighty whities, and Tunneler kills a guy by going where the sun don't shine. It's a very weird movie, and that's something I actually really appreciate about this movie. So may not be at the tippity top of my ranking, but still a fun, weird movie nonetheless. Produced directly after Curse of the Puppet Master, but in a way it could not be more different than Curse of the Puppet Master. Retro Puppet Master is a 1999 film that was shot in Romania. If you read It Came from the Video Aisle, there's a whole discussion about why Romania and why shoot in Romania, and the Full Moon and Charlie Band's relationship with Romania. But this is one of those movies shot in Romania, and it's directed by David Dakota, same guy who did Curse of the Puppet Master, but it feels so incredibly different. This is basically a kid's movie, where once again we get a prequel, but this time it is not a Puppet Master 3 kind of prequel where we're getting a war movie. This is way before that. This is Toulon, way before the puppets looked like the puppets. And here we get another contradiction, because this is the origin of how Toulon learns to animate his puppets, which we've got Cyclops here and Dr. Death, who are characters that don't appear in other movies, and then we've got like a real retro wooden look Tunneler and the other more famous puppets. Young Toulon, old Toulon, Guy Rolfe still shows up to kind of introduce this movie, and then we flash back to young Toulon, played by Greg Sestero, who, if you've seen The Room, is the star of The Room. If you've seen if you've seen The Disaster Artist or read the book The Disaster Artist, that guy, Greg Sestero, and he's not great in this film, but he's not The Room level bad. He does have a very, very silly French accent, and everyone has a silly accent in this movie. But there's a ton of production value in this movie. It is a Romanian shot set in France at the turn of the century movie. The thing that you'll kind of immediately notice is there's no gore in this movie at all. It is basically a kid's movie. It is reintroducing the Puppet Master puppets for kind of, I guess, a new generation, or trying to catch them on the VHS in the early days of DVD, and almost start a spin-off series. His band talks about in the video zone to this movie, he talks about his desire to kind of be like the Stan Lee of straight-to-video horror movies, where he's having all these characters cross over and stuff like that, which he does to more or less extent in a lot of his movies. He does in the Transfers movies, in the Doll Man movies. Doll Man shows up in a number of different things. Doll Man fights the demonic toys. But these characters don't really get used again after this, or at least not yet, because there's going to be a Dr. Death movie at some point, and I'm sure I'll have to review that to update this video. I like this movie a lot more than I was kind of expecting to. While I was going through this journey of watching and rewatching the Puppet Master sequels, I was talking to a friend who's a big fan of the series, and he kind of groaned when I got to Retro Puppet Master. But the thing is, I kind of like it. It's goofy. It's innocent. There's pretty much no stop motion animation, because these are new puppets. They look new. They're all rod puppets, and they clearly didn't have the budget for stop motion animation, and they didn't have any footage they could recycle of stop motion animation. So it's just them. They're fairly static. They do kind of look cool though. I do like the design of them, and it's silly and weird. And they fight mummies. It's basically the puppets versus Jedi mummies trying to protect young Toulon from the bad guys that are coming after them. But you could do worse. Speaking of doing worse, Puppet Master: The Legacy. It's almost not fair to talk about this movie in competition with the other 11, because it's barely a movie. This was made in 2003, and it is 80%, maybe even more than that. It is 80% a clip movie. It is a clip show. It's kind of a rehashing of the plots of the first 6 movies, using footage from them. The framing story is Peter, the kid from Puppet Master 3 that Toulon takes under his wing and rescues and gets out of Nazi-occupied Europe, is now a middle-aged man who's, I guess, living in the basement of the Bodega Bay Hotel for some reason. The only other actor in this newly shot footage is a female mercenary assassin that's been tasked with finding the secret of Toulon's elixir, and she's got this journal, and the way she got this journal is because she killed Rick from Puppet Master 4 and 5. That's how they kind of get around the continuity of the series, but not really, because it doesn't really unify anything. It doesn't really serve to do much of anything but have another release, had another DVD or VHS come out. I think this was DVD at this point, because I think I had this one on DVD, and I remember kind of being so underwhelmed that it was a clip show. You'll watch it and you'll be reminded of better movies. You'll be reminded of kind of the great scenes in the earlier films. You'll see all the same stop motion animation again, all the highlights, all the clips. But especially if you're watching these like I did, where I watched them all in a row, you get to this one and you're like, why do I have to sit through this 70 minutes of something I've already seen? It's just creatively a low point, and the look of it is the wraparound portion. It's the only Puppet Master movie I think that was shot kind of on tape. It looks bad, it looks cheap, and it's really kind of a bummer. And then we reach Axis of Evil, which on the back says the first new Puppet Master film in 10 years. This was 2010, so even Band himself is discounting Legacy and just counting the last real Puppet Master film as Retro Puppet Master. But this is 2010. They made you wait 10 years for something that is you're hoping is going to be a return to form. David Dakota is back once again. And the interesting thing about this movie is, it was shot in China, which is very odd and lends a very different quality to the movie, because it's 99% sets. It's 99% like really obvious kind of almost fakey looking sets. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we'll talk about that in a second. And B, the thing you notice about it is that it's setting up a trilogy that actually happens. Kind of like Puppet Wars was going to happen, kind of like a lot of these movies set up to be linking to other stories or allude to other stories or have stingers that feel like they're setting up a story that never actually comes. Puppet Master Axis of Evil, the sequels actually happen, and we have 2 of them. We are back again in World War II. The beginning of this film painstakingly recreates on a budget, on a tight budget, using existing footage and newly shot footage, the opening to the original first Puppet Master that takes place in 1939. We see Toulon hide his trunk away, and we see him kill himself. It kind of picks up exactly from there, where a kid who works at the Bodega Bay Hotel, Danny Coogan, this kind of bummed out kid who had polio, so he walks with a limp, and he really wants to sign up to go overseas and do his part in World War II, and he can't. But he befriended Toulon before Toulon killed himself, and he knows where the puppets are hidden, and he takes these puppets, and they kind of become his buddies, and he has to use them to foil a Nazi plot, because the Nazis are here in California, in LA, which is actually China, but they're here, and the 2 main guys, the 2 shadowy agents from that first movie that we saw coming to kill Toulon, are still there, and he has to kind of defeat these guys who are also working with, the Germans are also working with the Japanese, so all the Axis powers are here in LA, and it's almost like a Boy Who Cried Wolf thing, where no one believes this kid who couldn't go off to war, and he has to kind of, along with his girlfriend, figure out how to take down the Axis powers himself. This is a lower budgeted film. The main drawback, and this is going to become a refrain for almost all of the rest of the films, is that the puppets they have very limited motion. There's no stop motion. They do not really look like themselves. The molds that they're taken from, you can kind of see the poor lines. You can see like weird bubbles and stuff like that. They just don't look great. Like how Tunneler kind of looks on this DVD cover with his eyes kind of closed, a little bit like stoned Tunneler. Yeah, that's the way he looks for the movie. It doesn't have much range of motion, doesn't have a lot of alternate heads. That's the real drawback of this movie, is the way the puppets look. Because the rest of it, David Dakota like kind of directs the hell out of this movie, and even though it is very set bound and feels very stagey, that works because this is the 1940s. It feels like a a replication of like an RKO serial. It has that noir, two-fisted World War II era pulp aesthetic that a lot of the later films will kind of reach for, but this one has it, and this one really does feel like it does it right. So that's Axis of Evil. Not my favorite, but there's glimmers of hope there, and glimmers of style and interesting things. The writing's pretty good, the acting's pretty good, and then we get to, and now we're back in the US, and it's 5 years later, and we get to the, even though all of these DVDs, all these Blu-rays say Charles Band's Puppet Master, those were based on story ideas by Charles Band, and Charles Band was a very active producer in making those movies, but this is the first movie where Charles Band directs. And before I say a single bad thing about this movie, Charles Band is not a bad director. Charles Band has directed some of my favorite movies. I think the original Trancers is the best Full Moon / Empire movie, bar none, and he directed it. This movie, Axis Rising, is incredibly compromised. The kind of original sin of this movie is all the continuing characters from the last movie, Danny Coogan and his girlfriend, and some other characters that appear to kind of be disappeared because they don't look like themselves, are recast in this movie, in Axis Rising, and it's incredibly distracting. I think this movie was shot a few years later. It wasn't shot in China. It didn't have that budget, so they're doing what they can with Axis Rising, but it is just not. It's just not up to snuff. We see a kind of alternate origin for Six Shooter because the puppets build them themselves, even though the timeline doesn't work out for that with the earlier movies and with Puppet Master 3. It's a ton of like kind of plot holes and uninteresting ideas introduced. The puppets this is the nadir of the series. This is the worst that they look. They must have heard fan complaints after Axis of Evil that the puppets looked a little too matte and the effects didn't look 100% right. So they basically lacquered the puppets and they look way too shiny and look really different. It's just cheap and not so good. And you watch it and it's really, for me, it really feels kind of sad because you understand that Band is trying to make the best movie he can. You can see the limitations there on the screen as played in his day, and it just doesn't work. Like what's set up in Axis of Evil is not followed through in Axis Rising, and it's a real bummer. The recast leads are nowhere near as good. They don't really look or sound like themselves, and it just it's 70 minutes of plodding along. The one pro of this movie is that we finally add new puppets, and we add 4 new puppets, and these are the evil puppets. So the scientist at the heart of this movie, who's working for the Nazis, gets a hold of Toulon's elixir and makes his own puppets. And there's he's got one of the captors is kind of an Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS type, Diane Thorne type, voluptuous Nazi officer, and he likes her, and he models one of the puppets after her. She's Bombshell, and then there's a werewolf puppet, and the ideas of these puppets are cool. There's a tank puppet, but they just aren't used well. It loses a lot of the self-seriousness that the series had up until this point. It becomes almost like parody. It's like, well, if we don't have the budget to do it, why don't we just make it outrageous and silly and purposefully offensive? There's a kamikaze puppet that you can imagine what the kamikaze puppet looks like. It's just really tone deaf, and it's almost Full Moon trying to do Trauma, but not missing that Uncle Lloydie's kind of special elixir, as it were, and not quite getting it right. It's a movie that just really didn't work for me at all. Now I can hear the Full Moon diehards at the almost hour mark yelling at their screens and being like, well, if you don't like the movies, don't talk about them, or getting very touchy about me talking about some of these movies pretty frankly and not liking them. But I'm doing that because the movies have a redemptive arc, because the third movie in the Axis trilogy, in the Puppet Master Axis trilogy, is Axis Termination. It is again directed by Charles Band, and pretty much a direct continuation of Axis Rising. It very smartly ditches its leads without recasting. They specifically do it without recasting. But everything that doesn't work about Axis Rising is fixed in Termination. Pretty much everything. The puppets still look a little janky, but they're better range of motion. They look a little bit better in their faces and their molds, and we just continue this the puppets in LA trying to take out insurgent Nazi forces and fighting those evil puppets that we set up in the last movie. And it's a movie that moves. It's a movie that's fun and funny and doesn't feel mean-spirited like the last one kind of did. And it's probably even cheaper. It looks in some places even cheaper. There are digital squibs and digital gore that looks really not great, but it hardly matters. The last movie was flat and unappealing looking. This movie, to get around that, they just added gels to the lights, and it makes a world of difference. It looks that comic book tone that Band had been kind of chasing with these movies for 20 years. He kind of gets right here, and he gets it visually and tonally correct. And I really, really like this movie. Even though it's 5 years after the last one, it feels more of a piece with Axis of Evil. It's really fun. It's got like our main character this time, instead of the underdog, we get like a kind of John Cena look-alike action hero guy, and he teams up with a team of another team of psychics, which is bringing back an element that was really in the very first film, and it's back again. And this movie feels a little sleazy because, again, we have that one of the psychics is like a sex magic practitioner. The main one is a doctor. He's a little person, and we have his grown daughter is there helping them, she sees the future in her dreams. It's wacky and pulpy and weird, but it's got a ton of ideas shoved into its 70 minutes, and it really works. And then it's not technically a Puppet Master movie because it's not called a Puppet Master movie, but it's a direct sequel to Axis Termination. Blade the Iron Cross, the first spin-off movie. For decades, Charles Band has been wanting to spin these characters off like the Marvel Universe in a certain way, wanting to be that Stan Lee of straight-to-video horror movies, and Blade the Iron Cross is him actually doing it, putting his money where his mouth in. I don't know quite exactly what the deal is, but it is branded as part of the Deadly 10. The first movie in that series was Ouija's, which was a kind of stoner comedy based riff on the Ghoulies movies, and they seem to have bigger budgets. They seem to have more ambition. And there's something that they were produced alongside, like basically webcasts. You could watch the movie be made as they were making it. But Blade the Iron Cross is really a companion piece to Axis Termination. Tonally, it's very similar. Aesthetically, it's very similar. It's directed by John Lechago. Carries over some of the cast, some of the main characters. The psychic doctor's daughter, Elisa Ivanov, is the star of this one, played by actor Tanya Fox, and she's really delightful and really great. And her and Blade's rapport is continued from Axis Termination. They are once again fighting evil bad guys that really feel like they're ripped straight out of Captain America or something like that. The bad guy in this is really cool, and he has like a bad guy gimmick. He's got henchmen that are in like cool like get-ups and like gas masks and stuff like that. It feels like something like The Shadow or The Phantom. It feels like that era of World War II comic strip villainy. But like Axis Termination does, we've kind of put that sleaze and put that gore back in, and understanding that these movies really aren't going to ever be a hit with children. They are for 30-something, 40-something-year-old beardos like me, and it really does lean into that. It's pretty slight. It's maybe not quite on the level of Axis Termination because we really just do have Blade, but there's zombies too and stuff like that. There's a neat zombie makeup on these zombies. There's a lot of cool gore gags, and there's miniatures work, which there was in the last one too, where they like blow up a miniature, and it feels like, okay, they actually, maybe that doesn't look like it came from a $50 million movie, but at least they're out here building sets, building miniatures, really giving it the old college try. So John Lechago's Blade the Iron Cross. The series ends on a high note, but as we know, Charles Band, hopefully he's going to just keep making these movies forever. I have endless affection for this series, for Full Moon, and I really do hope they really do keep going, because they announced a Dr. Death movie, which sounds ridiculous and fun and sleazy and cool, and I can't wait to see that. But that's the 12 movies in the Puppet Master series. Before we rank them, before we stop, I do want to talk about the Blu-rays. If you are a casual fan, they have a set. They may not even have it anymore, but it's a box set where it's just the first three movies. But if you get that, you're missing out on all the fun sequels that do definitely vary in quality. But the best thing that you're missing out on if you don't pick up the kind of big mega set, which does occasionally go on sale. I would watch Full Moon's website for when they have their kind of 50% off sale, or when they have their coupon sales, or when they have their promotions. And I would 100% recommend, if you're interested in these movies at all, get the box set, because especially if you like special features, especially if you're interested in how movies like this are kind of made, the Arcana of the Puppet Master, there's not much about it on the order page, but let me tell you, it's just hours and hours of standard definition video, home video footage, from the sets of Puppet Master 2 and 3 predominantly. There's a little talk with Dave Allen that I'm not sure which movie it's from, but predominantly everything on this disc, there's an hour and 23 minutes of Puppet Master 2 behind the scenes footage, which is July and August, September in 1990. There's a little tiny bit of Puppet Master 5, like 5 minutes worth, and then there's 3.5 hours of more Puppet Master 2 behind the scenes stuff, and a full 3 hours of Puppet Master 3, where you even see like Universal Studios tour tram like passing the set as they're making Puppet Master 3. It's really like fly on the wall stuff, just filming days on sets. And it's if you like the Lord of the Rings appendices, those Peter Jackson, those really exhaustive, tend to be a lot of like raw behind the scenes footage. This is like that for the Puppet Master series. So this is, if I were to rank this would be one of my favorite discs in the set, but I'm just going to rank the movies. But I would highly, highly, highly recommend getting the box set so you get the Arcana of the Puppet Master, because if you're anywhere near a fan of this series, it's awesome stuff. It's really interesting. It's just great to put on in the background, because it's just like you're sitting on set in 1990 or 1991 or whatever it was. It's fantastic. Okay, this is my complete undisputed ranking of these films that pretty much changed order like right before I was going to film this. So take this with a grain of salt. It's just in good fun. This is not in no way binding. Please don't argue with me too hard or call me mean names down in the comments. But I am going to rank all 12 of the official canon Puppet Master movies right now. In 12th place, surprising nobody, Puppet Master: The Legacy, the clip show movie. This is that's the very bottom. Number 11, Puppet Master: Axis Rising. As we talked about, definitely my least favorite of the core real Puppet Master movies that aren't clip shows, but at least it sets up for the redemptive arc of Axis termination. Number 10, Curse of the Puppet Master. Yes, the standalone, the what the heck am I watching entry in the Puppet Master canon. Even with saying that, even while I'm like holding up and talking about it now, I really don't wonder if some days I wouldn't put it in 9th place. Because it's so weird. It so seems like a product of David Dakota's very particular view of the world and very particular embracing of 60s and 70s trash horror movies. But still, it's to me, it's number 10. Number 9, Retro Puppet Master, Dakota's companion piece to Curse of the Puppet Master that doesn't at all feel like a companion piece, feels like a totally different thing. The family-friendly, mummy-fighting version of the Puppet Master. I really like the way the retro puppets look, even though they're pretty low articulation. I just think they're cool. So this is number 9. Number 8, and here's where I'm going to start getting in trouble with people. Puppet Master 4. This is the first half of the Puppet Master 4 and 5 duology. To me, there's just not enough in this movie that Puppet Master 5 doesn't do more interesting and more better, and with more of a finite cap to it. Number 7, Puppet Master: Axis of Evil, the China Lens installment in the Puppet Master series, a kind of trying to be a return to form, and in some ways very much a return to form. It looks interesting. It's got an interesting premise. got like I said, that kind of RKO serials feel to it. David Dakota really nails that aesthetic. The costuming, the period costuming, the period look to the actors has an incredible amount of fidelity to it for such a low-budgeted film, for such a kind of unassuming film. The real drawback is just the way those puppets look. Number 6, Puppet Master 5. Like Puppet Master 4, kind of the last hurrah of these movies, really looking like big, lush, 35mm, could have seen it in a movie theater kind of productions, kind of that grand finale of that. And it has the puppet smackdown to end all puppet smackdown as the puppets gang up against Sutek in his kind of like ultra totem form. Very much feels like that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby aesthetic that band was striving for a lot of the time, realized. So Puppet Master 5, that is the number 6 movie on this list. Number 5 in the Puppet Master series, the most recent entry in the Puppet Master series, Blade the Iron Cross, which really has a lot of zeal and pep and really gives you hope for the series as we move into the 2020s. Number 4 on this list, Axis Termination, the real return to form, the don't call it a comeback redemption story after disappointing Axis Rising. Charles Band in the director's seat, really doing these stories right, even with the diminished budget that recent years and reality has kind of brought to a lot of Full Moon Productions, but it's got that soul. It's got soul, baby. I really like Axis Termination, and I'm sure this might be a controversial ranking of this film, but I quite like it. Number 3. The number 3 film is Puppet Master 3. Yeah, see, I tricked you. I told you that a lot of people consider this the best of the Puppet Master films, and I actually can see that argument, and on some days I might agree with it. It feels like the lushest, like the most big budget, like the most ambitious one in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways it is. But they had all that money, and it shows on the screen. It's a great end to the original Puppet Master trilogy, and one of the best prequels ever made. Prequels are really hard to do, and this is I'm not kidding. I'm not just grading on a curve. I'm not just saying the best prequel considering. I mean, this is one of the best prequels ever made, ever filmed. This picture is one of the best prequels ever made. My number 2 favorite Puppet Master movie is the original. David Schmoller, Hellfire out of the gate. What a great, weird movie. Some of those final sequences, the mauling of the bad guy in the elevator is probably my favorite sequence in a Puppet Master movie. I remember it giving me nightmares as a kid. I love this movie with all my heart. But it is not my number 1 pick. My number 1 pick, maybe the only sequel in all of horrordom, maybe next to Final Destination 2, that I prefer to the original, Puppet Master 2, Torch Arrives. It is wild and wacky, full to the brim with a body count. It is weird. It has a crazy ending. It has awesome special effects. The puppets look amazing. The stop motion is incredible. There's not only awesome puppet effects, but there's awesome special makeup effects. It is a hell of a movie. It is a true blue horror movie. There's some really uncanny, gross stuff in this movie. It's just great. It works on every level. It has really series-defining elements in it, and yet it feels so apart from the rest of the series when you watch them in order like this, and when you consider like how much we kind of grow to love Andre Toulon, or at least Guy Ralph's version of Andre Toulon, and how different he is in this movie. I like that difference, and I like what a weird outlier special movie this is, and I especially like that it's directed by Dave Allen, who in a lot of ways is the kind of beating heart at the center of these movies, even when he's not present, even when he's not helping make these movies. Yeah, I really love Puppet Master 2. There you go. That is my ranking of the Puppet Master movies. That is my review of this giant Puppet Master box set that you can get at Full Moon. I think they sell it on Amazon too. I'll put links down in the description to all these movies. I'll put links down in the description to It Came From the Video Aisle, which is an incredible read. Even if you're only partially interested in these movies, if you like the history of movies like this, it's well worth reading. I'm Adam Caesar. If you like this video, please hit like. If you really like this video, please subscribe and check out my other videos. If you really, really like this video, but you want to not listen to me talk for a little while, if you want to just read a book, if you want to hang out with me, please go buy my books. Please go check out Clown in the Cornfield, recently nominated for the Bram Stoker Award. I would really, really appreciate that, and I will see you next week, Or maybe I'll take a break after this one. Maybe it'll be in 2 weeks, because geez, what a video. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.